impenetrable, although it needs something a more sophisticated implant. The other forms of implants are rather simple. They involve putting something in the eye, running a very thin fiber optic wire into key areas of the brain, and suddenly you have an individual who sees a much broader spectrum of light than the normal individual. So what we can actually do is we can not only work with a normal range of enablement and optimization, we can also go beyond that into these radical modifications. And here, what we're seeing is the capability to do that. And although we may have some qualms about doing this, please understand that is not classified technology. That's being used in the medical range, and as a consequence of that, this is intellectual property that is broadly distributable. Here, once again, there are discrete programs that are actually dedicated to just this type of thing that are ongoing in China and represent the key focus of their next 5-year plan. As well, we can develop a variety of different drugs that can be used in war-fighting scenarios. Now, what I want to make sure you understand is that these drugs can not only enhance the warfighter with regard to maximizing their particular capability, but can also be used to maximize war-fighting capability by then affecting others. So clearly, I can affect others by either what I'm doing, making me better, or what I do to them, making them, quote, less better, or at very, very least, not wanting to fight. In the main, these are indeed weapons of mass disruption, not destruction. And the reason that I mention this to you is that that absence of mass destruction has in some cases veiled them for closer scrutiny, but the disruptive effect can be huge. So for example, one of the things that we can do is we can use a variety of these new forms of drugs that target specific functions of the nervous system, such as things like affiliation, amelioration, attitudes, behaviors, and cognitions, and we can target key individuals. Earlier this morning, we had General who spoke to all of us, and he gave us a very rousing message and talked to us how specifically we need to engage science and technology. If I were, for example, able to modify the coffee that he drank, the water that he drank this morning, with an undetectable chemical that was delivered at a very, very low range, and he gets up before you and he says, this is all bunk, ladies and gentlemen, you shouldn't be here in this room. I don't believe a word of what I'm going to hear, and my particular concern is, with regard to the United States Army, is we should move in other directions, and we should basically work on potting flowering plants. You think one of two things. Either he's completely gone wackadoodle and lost his rocker, or I'm going to follow this guy to the end of the earth because he's not only a power-driven leader, he is in fact a charismatic leader who I believe in. So the ability to affect a single individual, whether it is a military leader, a political leader, or a diplomat, through the use of modifiable brain functions at very, very low levels of non-detectable drugs that exist in the high nano range, is in fact creating a ripple effect by virtue of their followers, either an affiliative effect or a disruptive effect. Moreover, we recognize we can also use a variety of microbiological agents to incur a whole host of morbidities, but not necessarily mortality. And what we may want to do is to utilize these first two in such a way that creates a very, very broad ripple effect to then essentially dissolve the fiduciary between the public and the public health. Let me give you an example, and it's an example that I used in a recent article that I wrote for the Defense News. And I'll give it to you very, very briefly. What I do is I either use a drug in very, very low concentrations that may not necessarily be traceable. And again, this is highly doable. You just have to permeate the edge of a drinking vessel or an atmospheric vessel, get the drug on board. It kind of auto-assembles in situ because of nanopharmacology. Very difficult to trace, and it creates a biological downstream effect. Nothing I'm telling you here is sci-fi. It all exists within the medical range and how we're able to treat a variety of neurological disorders targeting the brain, being able to get in there more specifically, affect certain neural cancers, et cetera. And what we can do with some of these drugs is we can also use these techniques that we're learning on the pharmaceutical side to modify certain bugs. And we spoke earlier about a technique that's become very well known, CRISPR-Cas9, that allows us to literally modify bugs in a variety of different ways. So I now may be able to take a relatively harmless microbiological agent, a bacterium or a virus, do some gene editing and make this thing far more morbidly viable, make it far more virulent, and in some cases even make it far more lethal. But I don't want lethality, at least not necessarily. What I want is high morbidity. I want people to complain. So what do? I go to Des Moines. Ladies and gentlemen and people on the screen, I have nothing against Des Moines. I lived there for 4 years. I go to Des Moines. I infect a couple of sentinel cases in Des Moines. I go to Seattle. I infect a couple of cases there. I go to North Carolina. I go to Wisconsin. What I'm doing is I'm using a dispersion methodology to be able to infect sentinel cases with a highly morbid condition. These individuals complain. Again, this is a central nervous system condition. So they're complaining of whatever the bug may do. It'll produce some cascade of neurological